My name is Marcus Hale, and for the last 14 years, I've worked as a municipal infrastructure inspector. Roads, bridges, storm drains, culverts, retention basins. The boring stuff nobody thinks about, until it fails. When I bought my house, I didn't fall in love with the kitchen or the backyard fire pit. I fell in love with what ran under the street. A reinforced concrete culvert installed in the early 90s carried stormwater from the upper neighborhood safely beneath our row of homes and out toward the city canal. It wasn't flashy, you couldn't even see it, but it worked. And more importantly, it kept our homes dry. That culvert had survived hurricanes, 100-year storms, and decades of neglect, until Denise became HOA president. Denise fit the role perfectly. Late 30s, sharp bob haircut, bright pink blazer even at informal meetings. A smile that never reached her eyes. She loved rules, especially the ones she enforced on everyone else. She didn't like that the storm grate sat near the entrance of her driveway. She said it was ugly. I found out what she meant one Tuesday morning when I woke up to the sound of jackhammers. I stepped outside and saw a private landscaping crew tearing up the asphalt near the curb. The storm grate was already gone. In its place, fresh soil, decorative stone, and a new curved planter bed. I walked straight across the street. "Denise," I said calmly, "where's the culvert access?" She didn't even look up from her clipboard. "Oh, that thing?" she said. "It was an eyesore. I had it buried." My stomach dropped. "You buried a municipal storm culvert?" I asked. She sighed, like I was inconveniencing her. "It's HOA-adjacent infrastructure. I checked the bylaws." "That culvert isn't HOA property. It's city-managed. You can't obstruct it." She finally looked at me, smiling. "Well, it's gone now." I took a breath. "Denise, I inspect infrastructure failures for a living. That culvert carries runoff from 47 homes uphill. If you block it—" She cut me off. "Marcus, it hasn't flooded here in years. You worry too much." That's when I noticed something else. The crew wasn't just covering the opening. They were packing the soil tight, compacting it like a foundation. Decorative pavers went on top, then a stone bench. She hadn't temporarily covered it. She had sealed it. I pulled out my phone and showed her archived city diagrams. "This is a designated stormwater conduit. Blocking it violates state drainage code." She glanced at the screen and waved it away. "Then the city should maintain it better," she said. "I'm improving curb appeal." That night, I emailed the city utilities department. No response. The next morning, I filed a written complaint with the HOA board. Denise was the board. 3 days later, we got a light rain, not a storm, just steady drizzle. I watched water pool at the curb where it never had before. The puddle grew, then crept sideways, then crossed the street. By nightfall, my front yard was saturated. Water pressed against my foundation like a held breath. I walked over again. "You see this?" I asked, pointing at the waterline. "This is from a light rain." She stood on her porch, arms crossed. "Looks like poor grading on your property." That's when I knew this wasn't ignorance, it was arrogance. I pulled up the forecast. "Denise," I said quietly, "there's a stalled storm system predicted next week, 6 inches in under 24 hours. She smiled. "Well, good thing my driveway is elevated now." She turned and went inside. I stood there, listening to water gurgle beneath a buried culvert that could no longer breathe. I had inspected enough failures to recognize the pattern. When infrastructure is ignored, it doesn't fail slowly. It fails all at once. And when it does, it always chooses the path of least resistance. I went home and started preparing. Not for revenge, for impact. By Thursday morning, the rain had stopped, but the water hadn't drained. That was the first real warning. Storm systems come and go, but drainage systems are supposed to empty. When they don't, it means the pressure is building somewhere you can't see. I stood at my front window watching the puddle by the curb shimmer in the sunlight like a held secret. It hadn't moved an inch overnight. I grabbed my inspection boots and walked the block. Every driveway uphill from Denise's house was dry. Every yard below it showed damp seams creeping outward like veins. The water was stacking up, searching for a release that no longer existed. I knocked on my neighbor Carla's door 2 houses down. "You seeing this?" I asked. She nodded. "My basement smells like mud." I knocked on 2 more doors. Same story. Soft ground, slow leaks, no visible cause. At noon, I drove downtown to the municipal utilities office in person. Emails can be ignored. People are harder to dismiss when they're standing in front of your desk. I laid the culvert schematics down flat. "It's blocked," I said, "fully sealed." The clerk frowned. "We haven't authorized any work on that line." "I know, that's the problem." She promised to escalate it. I'd heard that word before. It usually meant after the damage. On my way home, I stopped at the hardware store. Not the suburban one with decorative planters and solar lights, the industrial supplier on the edge of town. Concrete forms, drainage pipe, rebar. I wasn't planning retaliation. I was planning containment. That night, the first official HOA notice arrived in my inbox. Violation notice. Unauthorized water diversion suspected. Property under review. I laughed out loud. She was laying groundwork, paper trails, preemptive blame. The next day, Denise held an emergency HOA beautification walk. She strolled the block in heels, clipboard tucked under her arm, pointing out cracked driveways, faded fences, unapproved trash bins. When she reached my house, she stopped. "Your lawn appears oversaturated," she said loudly, making sure others heard. "This can attract pests." "That's because the culvert is blocked," I replied evenly. She smiled. "There's no culvert there anymore." Exactly. That afternoon, the forecast updated. The stalled system wasn't moving. 6 inches became 8, then 10. The meteorologist used words engineers hate: historic, unprecedented, stationary. I printed the forecast and taped it to my fridge. Then I started building. Not on the street, not near her driveway, on my own property. I dug a trench along the edge of my front yard where the water naturally wanted to flow. I installed a reinforced concrete barrier beneath the soil line. Nothing visible from the surface, just enough to stop lateral seepage into my foundation. I added a secondary French drain leading away from my house, angled precisely toward the lowest point of pressure buildup. If water came, it wouldn't settle, it would move. I worked at night, floodlights humming, boots soaked with mud. A couple of neighbors watched from their porches. One of them whispered, "Is this legal?" I nodded. "It's necessary." Denise noticed on the 3rd night. She marched over, heels sinking into wet soil. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "Protecting my house." "You're altering drainage patterns." "Only on my property." She scoffed. "I'm issuing you a stop work order." "You don't have that authority." She pulled out her phone and started recording. "Say that again," she said sweetly. I did. She left, smiling. The next morning, I received a fine notice, $300 per day for unauthorized ground disturbance. I paid it. I wasn't buying permission, I was buying time. Saturday morning, the sky turned the color of old steel. The air felt heavy, like the atmosphere itself was leaning on the neighborhood. I walked the street one last time. Water had already begun pooling at Denise's driveway, pressing against the decorative stones covering the buried culvert. The soil above it was now darker, saturated, heavy. I could see micro-settling along the edges. The earth was straining. I knocked on her door. She opened it, irritated. "You again?" "Last warning," I said. "Remove the blockage, today." She laughed. "You're not the city. You're not the HOA. You're just a neighbor with anxiety." Thunder rolled in the distance. Water doesn't negotiate. It collects. She shut the door in my face. By dusk, the rain started. Not hard, relentless. Sheets of water sliding off roofs, gutters overflowing. The street began to shine. I stood under my porch, flashlight in hand, watching the curb fill. The pressure was building. I knew where it would go, and so did the ground. At 11:47 p.m., I felt it before I heard it, a low vibration beneath my feet. The buried culvert was screaming. At exactly 12:03 a.m., the rain stopped sounding like rain. It sounded like a river, the kind you don't see until it's already carved its way through everything in its path. I stepped off my porch and felt the vibration in the soles of my boots. The streetlights reflected off moving water now, not puddles. The curb had vanished. The road had become a channel. This was no longer a storm. This was a hydraulic event. I shined my flashlight toward Denise's driveway. The decorative stone she'd laid over the buried culvert was beginning to sag inward, like a mattress with a broken spring. Water pressed against it from below, searching for an escape it had used for decades. The soil above the culvert bulged, then cracked. The sound was sharp and final, like a gunshot buried under thunder. The driveway collapsed. Water exploded upward in a violent surge, ripping stones free and launching them into the street. Mud followed, then debris. The pressure that had been trapped beneath the surface for days finally found oxygen. And when it did, it didn't ease out. It detonated. A wall of water blasted across Denise's driveway and slammed into her garage door. The aluminum buckled instantly. The bottom seal tore away like paper. I heard screaming. Lights snapped on inside her house. The water didn't pause. It didn't hesitate. It surged forward, rolling straight toward the front entrance. The landscaping she'd paid thousands for vanished in seconds, torn apart by the same force she'd dismissed as runoff. The front door bowed inward. The seal failed. Water poured into her home like it had been invited. I stood still. This was the moment every engineer knows but never wants to witness. The instant when accumulated neglect converts into irreversible motion. Inside her house, furniture began to float. A sofa bumped into a wall and rolled onto its side. Framed certificates slid off the walls, disappearing beneath brown water. The smell hit even from across the street. Wet drywall, soil, sewage carried backward through lines never meant to flow that way. Denise appeared in the doorway, ankle deep, then knee deep, then waist deep in seconds. She screamed for help. Neighbors came out onto their porches, phones raised, stunned into silence by the speed of it all. I didn't record. I didn't move. I had already done everything I could. At 12:19 a.m., the fire department arrived. They waded through moving water and forced entry through a side window. Pumps roared to life, but they were fighting pressure, not flooding. The source was still feeding the disaster from beneath. One firefighter shouted, "Where's the drain?" No one answered, because the drain was buried under a bench and a rose planter. By 1:40 a.m., the rain tapered off. The damage did not. When the water finally receded, Denise's house looked hollowed out. Drywall peeled, cabinets hung crooked, electrical outlets drooped like wilted leaves. Her garage floor had cracked down the center, split by undermining soil. My house? Dry. My trenches had done their job. The redirected flow moved past my property and pooled at the lowest point, the exact point Denise had sealed. Morning brought silence, and officials. City utilities arrived first, then Public Works, then an inspector from the State Drainage Authority. They didn't need my explanation. The evidence was visible from the street. They excavated the driveway by noon. The culvert lay crushed and collapsed, choked with compacted soil and decorative stone. One official shook his head. This was deliberate, he said. Denise stood nearby, wrapped in a blanket, eyes red and unfocused. The insurance adjuster arrived after lunch. He walked through the house slowly, stepping over warped floors and ruined furniture. He stopped at the excavation driveway,
took photos, and asked one question. Who authorized the blockage? No one answered. I handed him the printed emails, the diagrams, the violation notice she sent me. He read quietly, then closed his folder. This claim will be denied. Damage caused by intentional obstruction of municipal drainage is excluded. Additionally, this constitutes code violation and civil liability. Denise sat down on the curb. 2 weeks later, the fines arrived. State penalties for obstructing a stormwater conduit, city charges for emergency response, mandatory restoration costs. The total exceeded $180,000. She resigned as HOA president the same afternoon the board held a vote without her. The city restored the culvert properly, reinforced, marked, protected with visible access points and signage. The bench and rose planter were removed. Grass replaced them. Quiet returned. A month later, Denise put her house up for sale. The listing mentioned recent water event. No offers came. Sometimes, when it rains now, I stand on my porch and listen. The water moves. It drains. It behaves because it's allowed to. People think disasters happen suddenly. They don't. They are built slowly, one arrogant decision at a time, until physics decides it's done waiting. Denise thought she controlled the neighborhood, but water doesn't recognize titles. It recognizes pressure, and it always, always collects what it's owed.